Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to reconcile morality and ethics with non-duality and relativism. So if you're a seeker of enlightenment or you're interested in non-duality, you'll notice that very often in the philosophy of non-duality, what people who actually have become enlightened have realized, or people who've had a satori or awakening experience have realized, is that all is one, and that one thing is perfect, and that perfect thing is God, and so everything is always exactly as it should be. Now, this truth falls hard on the ears to somebody who has not experienced this shift before, because they look around at the world and they see, oh my gosh, there's so much suffering in the world. How could everything be perfect when there's so much suffering? And how am I supposed to just sit back and accept it and be unconditionally loving to reality as it is when so many people are needlessly suffering? So in this, I think it's very, very important to realize that there are two different types of truths. One is the truth that's a practical, conventional truth, things that are effective for being a human being, things that are going to yield good results on the human sphere. Then there's absolute truth. That is the non-dual truth. That is the fact that all is one and that all things spring from a divine force and is naturally perfect. So in this sense, even a seeker of enlightenment who's trying to recognize that everything is perfect, there is still room for morality and ethics there, as long as you don't hold on to it too tightly, and as long as you realize that your morals and your ethics don't have any existential truth to them, other than the fact that you are actually experiencing them in real time as emotional preferences that arise as sensations in your body and thoughts in your mind. So it's important to realize that morality and ethics are mutually exclusive to the realization of enlightenment. But we must also recognize that we have natural preferences and that most people have a universal preference to live in a state of non-suffering. And so it's very important that we have ethical behavior that begets a more compassionate society, a society that lessens the suffering for the individuals in it. So the other week, maybe a month ago, I was watching a Rupert Spira video. If you haven't checked out Rupert Spira, I highly recommend it. I really enjoy his teachings. He's a non-dual teacher. He is enlightened. And he really summed this up in a really nice way. So basically, he'd gotten a question from one of the members of his audience. And basically, the person had asked, what if somebody is in an abusive relationship? And, it's a really not a good thing to be in. But then they also want to be unconditionally loving and unconditionally accepting of what is. So they were wondering, it's like, how can I say no when enlightenment is basically an unconditional yes to all things? And I think that Rupert Spira really put it nicely when he said that there can be a very loving no within that unconditional loving yes. So for example, if you're in a bad situation, and suddenly you feel a negative emotion come up that says, hey, don't go there, don't do this, then you listen to that emotion, because that emotion is also part of reality. Your emotions are a valid part of reality that need to be accepted. What I notice is that a lot of times people who are seeking enlightenment, a lot of people who are interested in non-duality have a tendency to gloss over the emotional reality, which is an actual, real, tangible reality. And they think, oh, well, the non-dual truth is that everything is perfect. And so that's okay that that exists, because otherwise I'll be moralizing and saying this should not be so. Now, of course, moralization and should and should not statements can be actually a detriment to seeking enlightenment, but it's also a detriment to seeking enlightenment to resist your awareness of your own emotions and your own preferences. So your preferences do exist as a real thing. That's what your morals are based off of. So if you think that it's best to live in a society ruled by compassion, then your preferences are going to reflect that. So these are very, very important to honor. But you have to understand that there is no universal moral code other than the fact that nobody wants to suffer, and so everybody's going to kind of decide on whatever they think is going to reduce suffering the most. So morality is always kind of like, one of my subscribers called it, sort of like building ladders up in the clouds. Underneath all of it, there has to be a preference, an underlying premise for all of these different morals to be built on. And essentially all premises have no backing, because there is no solid objective right or wrong in reality that we can actually point to as an existential truth. However, morality and ethics for society at large is incredibly important, because these mental frameworks will determine how the social patterns go, and the social patterns, how they go, determine the quality of life for the people within the society. So you have to understand that morality and ethics have great practical and conventional use, but they don't have any existential truth. Now, understanding this is very, very important, because when we realize that morality and ethics don't have any existential truth, then we drop the need to be better than anybody else at them. And we also drop the need to demonize people who don't match up to the standards that we have decided are the moral best ways to be. So when we hold our beliefs and our morals and our code of ethics very loosely, in the sense that we know that they're not inherently true, but that they're a really great tool to use, then we can pick them up and set them down as we're seeking the truth of reality. So my personal ethical code is quite simple, because a simple tool is much easier to put down than a more complex tool. A lot of people get very, very ideological, and they start coming up with all different ideas of how a person should act and how a person should be. And, they have just so many different standards. And for me personally, I choose one standard, and one standard only, to judge whether or not I should do an action or whether or not I should condone an action. And that's the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I find that this rarely steers me wrong. Now again, there's no existential truth to this, other than the fact that living in this way reduces suffering for yourself and for other beings. But there's no inherent rightness to human beings not suffering. There's no inherent wrongness to human beings suffering. It's just more preferable to not suffer. So morality and ethics sort of work like gravity. So gravity only works relative to a planet. So for example, the Earth has a particular pull of gravity. And so all things are going to be relative to that. And gravity is going to be the practical truth of what it is to live on Earth. We get used to living a certain way and moving about a certain way, and our bodies are adapted to that. So it's important to be able to live within the limitations of gravity if Earth is the planet that you live on. So morality works a lot in the same way. If the end that you want is to reduce suffering for all human beings and all animals and all sentient beings, if that's your goal, then there are very particular things that will actually lead to that, very objective things. And there are other things that will lead away from that. And so it's important to adopt values that will actually benefit yourself and benefit humanity if you adopt values. But again, there's nothing inherently right about reducing suffering. I mean, it could be just as right for us to be hit by an asteroid and be completely wiped out. There's really no right or wrong, good or bad in the entire universe from an existential absolute level. But from the everyday human level, yes, it makes a lot of difference. But also, in adopting these truths, we have to also recognize that there's nothing inherently existentially true about them. But just because there's nothing inherently existentially true about them does not mean they're invalid, because remember, this truth comes from an emotional core. And that emotional core is a real aspect of reality. And so to gloss over that and to be in resistance to that is to resist part of reality, and therefore is not unconditionally loving, and therefore will not beget you ego transcendence, and it will not beget you enlightenment. So you have to really be able to find that fine line between clinging too tightly to morality and ethics and beliefs and ideals, and also accepting reality exactly as it is and noticing the inherent perfection that is in reality. And so for me, it becomes very difficult to suss out this line when I get triggered by certain things. So for example, for me, I don't like it when people show intolerance to large groups of people and sort of project their own ideas onto those people and sort of dehumanize them. For me, that's something that it really disagrees with my sensibilities and always has. It makes me feel really yucky and disgusted when I see that. But then I also have to look and say, oh, well, it is part of the perfection of reality. And so even though I don't like it, I have to recognize that if it is that way right now, then for right now that is the way that it should be, because that is the way it is. But at the same time, this does not invalidate my disgust, because my disgust is also the way that it is. And in my preferences, I can shape myself in a particular way to impact the world in such a way that it diminishes this problem. Because that is also part of unconditional love, is to accept your own emotions and then to be able to create from them what you want in your own reality. So many enlightened people have spoken about how at once they can feel unconditional love toward everything that is, but then also at the same time feel disgusted at things. An enlightened person can look at people being tortured and feel disgust and feel sorrow for them, but then also to recognize that their disgust and their sorrow and the torturing and everything that's in reality springs from unconditional love, because the nature of reality is love itself. Now, I understand that that is a bold claim to make, and one that I cannot back up with proof, but this is the truth, that people who are enlightened, or people who have had an ego-transcendent experience like I have in the past, and so I have realized this at some point in time. And even though right now that's a very abstract, far distant memory for me, you know, it's been really quite a guiding light for me in my life ever since, because it's like once you catch a glimpse, it really puts things in perspective. And even though I'm not living the truth of non-duality right now, for me that's not the perspective that I have, but it really makes things quite clear. Because if you realize that all is one, then you're going to naturally be treating everyone exactly as you would want to be treated. Because you don't want to eventually have to, on down the road, experience the negative things that you put out into the world upon others. Because your existence as you is fairly arbitrary. So understand that morality and ethics and beliefs are completely mutually exclusive from the realization of enlightenment in the seeking phase. You know, you can do as many good things as you want, and it's never going to get you enlightenment. Enlightenment is not about doing good things. However, oftentimes when people become enlightened and they recognize that everything's connected, then they will naturally, their morals and ethics will naturally come into alignment with where they're treating the whole of reality as they would want themselves treated, which most people want to be treated nicely and to not have suffering. So the practical truth of morality and ethics is super important to reconcile with absolute truth. Anyway, that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button below and subscribe. Also, check out my blog at thediamondnet.org and sign up for content updates. I give out new updates every Sunday, as well as on the first of the month. And other than that, that's all I have. And until next time, keep becoming more you.